Alright, Year 9s. Today is the first lesson for your assessment task. It is a research task. What that means is you'll be using a computer, which you can find the laptop trolley at the end of the room. And using that computer, you'll research and provide yourselves with information. The end goal of this assessment is to design an energy-efficient house that will insulate and retain heat, using your knowledge of heat transfer, which we have learned in the last 2 weeks. Remember, by being energy efficient, we are in fact looking at ways to reduce our reliance upon heating and air conditioning, thus lower costings and making electricity bills cheaper. But first things first, before you officially begin, I want to go over 2 things with you all. Please raise your hand, showing me that you have your booklet that I handed out at the start of the lesson. Fantastic. I can see everyone has their booklet. We will continue on. This booklet and this assessment is split into 2 parts, Part A and Part B. Part A is 6 questions, which is designed to provide you with the background knowledge required for Part B. Part B will be an extended response, and we'll go over it tomorrow. For today, I want you to focus on answering the questions in Part A. But how I want you to answer these questions is interesting, what I want you to pay attention to. Here, I've provided you with an example. This question is not in your work booklet, so please don't get your pens out ready to answer it. This is not actually part of your assessment. In Catherine, the average temperature during the wet season is 36 degrees Celsius. Houses need to be designed to keep occupants cool and comfortable during these months. How can this be done? You would then go onto your computer and look at ways that houses in tropical climates can be kept cool and comfortable. Or you could even type in, how does a house stay cool in summer? Those sorts of questions that will relate to, that could provide you with the answers needed for this. I then wrote an answer in reply to this question, and this is what I want you to focus on. There are 3 aspects of this answer that we will go through. Keeping a home cool in Northern Australia can be achieved if you design it well. According to Australia's Guide to Environmentally Sustainable Homes, you can do this through insulation. The insulation material can act as a barrier to the flow of heat energy. Orientation is also important. Positioning the house so the least amount of sun is beamed onto it during the day is an ideal way of preventing heat energy from easily transferring. There are 3 things in that I want you to focus on. One is I have provided 2 suggestions on how a house can be designed to keep its occupants cool and comfortable. 2 suggestions. They are insulation and orientation. The second thing is, after that, I then provide why it works, how it actually works. Why do we do this? So insulation material can act as a barrier to the flow of heat energy. That is a how or a why. Orientation. What is orientation? I've actually explained it. Position of the house. Why do we do it? So the least amount of sun is beamed onto it. Why is it important that you actually provide that extra information after you provide a suggestion to the question, after you provide a suggestion in your answer? To show me what you've learned, to show me that you've actually absorbed the research and actually read the required materials you found. The last thing is actually quite important. Can anyone suggest it? I actually have provided my reference, my resource, where I got that information from. In the sentence, according to Australia's Guide to Environmentally Sustainable Homes, you can do this through insulation. Australia's Guide to Environmentally Sustainable Homes is a reference. And that's what I want you all to focus on for the next part before you begin. Referencing. In your booklet at the end, you'll see a section for referencing. Referencing is how we record our resources. The things we use to help us find information. Could anyone suggest to me what a resource could be for this task? Your computer, the internet. Fantastic. Another one? Yes, your class notes are also an acceptable resource or reference. Anything else? The textbook excerpts I've supplied over the last 2 weeks, yes, they could very well be helpful. Then, when you're doing a website though, I wish for you to follow this format. Website name, Australia's Guide to Environmentally Sustainable Homes. The web address is very important. Why do you provide that? Just show me where it's from, so I can actually look up and check that you got your information correctly. And the date that you went on that website. When I create this answer, it was on the 15th of May, 2023. You'll write your reference in a Harvard-style format. Basically, you're taking these three things and rearranging them around. You've got an author, a year it came out, the name of your website, Australia's Guide to Environmentally Sustainable Homes, your web address here, and accessed on the 15th of May, 2023. So an author for a website is generally the organisation or title of the website. In this particular case, Australia's Guide to Environmentally Sustainable Homes was written by the Australian government. Here. Now, generally speaking, sometimes you should be able to find a year that the website published that information. It could be 2015, 2021, but generally there will be a year. In the event you cannot find a year, you'll write ND. ND means not determined. Can anyone provide an answer for what not determined? Why would you raise that? Because you could not figure out the date. It was impossible to determine. Fantastic. Any questions? It's important for for being not determined, is that you actually can tell me that you found a website, you found the information, but you still could not find a year for when it was published. That is why it's important to say that it's not determined. Thank you. Any questions on anything else regarding how you would answer a question and how you would answer a reference? Fantastic. You may begin your independent work. I have got printouts of these two slides, which I will give to you all to make sure you can model your answers and references appropriately.
So this will be the second video on feedback that I'll be giving to 3 samples of student work related to the task that I was instructing them on in the previous video. So here we have student sample 1. This is of question 1 and 2 from part A of the assessment booklet, which I was showing to the class in the previous video. Here we have in question 1 and 2, the student has provided an answer or answers to both questions. And in question 1, which is what is the thermal gradient, how is it linked to the transfer of heat, they have replied with a hot object always flows to a cold object. Now that demonstrates to me that they're able to recall some of the knowledge that was learned in previous lessons relating to the thermal gradient, but it is not presented in a way that I can actually clearly see that the student has demonstrated their knowledge. So that would need to be reworded in such a way, because a hot object does not flow to a cold object. It is the heat energy that transfers from a hot object to a colder object. So for student sample 2, I've provided another student's answers, which particularly for question 2 more than question 1, provides that little bit of extra substance that was missing from the previous sample. So it again goes back to part A. Now question 2 is where there has definitely been a improvement compared to student 1 in that what are the 3 processes of heat transfer? For each process provide one example. This student has said conduction is the process that heat energy is transferred through impact between the atoms or molecules touching. So they're able to tell me what conduction is. They've given me what it does and how it actually works, but they still haven't exactly provided an example. Now, through transferring heat energy through the impact between molecules or particles, while that is actually in effect what conduction is, the question itself is actually asking for provide one example. And that is the issue we're looking at, is that they still haven't exactly provided an example, but they've definitely shown the depth of their knowledge in that. Unfortunately, they still haven't gone around to giving an example for convection and radiation, the other two thermal processes. So my feedback for them would be that they would need to look back and think of providing an example showing me that they can actually apply their knowledge and actually be able to look at things happening in the real world and say, that'll be conduction, that'll be convection. Oh, the light coming from the sun, that's radiation. That is essentially what I'll be looking for. And here we come to our final student sample, sample number 3. So this one is actually focusing on questions 5 and 6 of the part A of the assessment booklet. Question 6 is what I would like to focus on at the moment. So right here, this particular student has given me a huge amount of information that has shown me that they actually found quite a bit of research, but I'll read it out loud. So question 6, how did First Nation Australians prevent heat transfer and conserve energy while using bedding and clothing in various climatic regions of Australia? So the student has answered, the First Nations people prevented heat transfer by wearing clothes that are made out of animals such as platypus, sugar glider and emu. Tribes in South Australia would dress up in full cloaks made of animal skins covering from their necks to their feet. They would use skin and sticks to make houses. They could make shade from the sun and not get sunburnt. So, based on that example, that particular student has given me a huge amount of information that needs to be broken down in order for it to be deemed a successful answer. It was one thing I would like to note that I was really impressed with just how much information they were able to find online and how much information they were able to put on the paper. But it's more the structure of their answer that I would like to focus on. So, First Nations people prevented heat transfer by wearing clothes. They provided me with one answer. They wore clothes. It also said made out of animal furs, such as platypus, sugar glider, and emus. What I would like to have seen is simply something as simple as those animal skins would provide insulation and keep them warm. But in the second section, he says tribes in South Australia would dress up in full cloaks made of animal skin coming from their necks down to their feet. So he does say in South Australia, where it is a colder climate, that they wore full cloaks of animal skin. But again, it's like you need that sort of thing where they would prevent heat transfer by providing insulation. Those animal skins would provide insulation. A comparison to a jumper or a hoodie would also be acceptable. And in the final thing though, they would use skins and sticks to make houses so they could shade from the sun. So they've told me about something else that they did where they changed their dwellings using skin and sticks. They could seek shade from the sun. That would be preventing solar radiation from transferring heat to themselves. So this answer is full of information, and it's really great to see their ability of research, but we need to make sure we can structure those answers to a point which is actually appropriate and adheres to what the instructions that I gave in the first video. So now we come to video 3, adjustments for diverse learners. There are 3 adjustments that I have made for this lesson that we can refer to. The first one is that during the instructional phase of the lesson, I do make a request from my students to clarify if they can see the whiteboard, follow the PowerPoint while I'm giving my instruction. This is particularly directed towards the students in the back row. My science lab is actually quite large, and the back rows there's quite a big distance between the back rows and actually the whiteboard in question. So I do print out hard copies of the slides to ensure that my students have a hard copy and can in fact can actually refer to it in the event that their eyes cannot see the PowerPoint. The next thing I do is that in this particular class is I have two students who are diagnosed with dyslexia, and in accordance with what the Students with Additional Needs Department have done, I've provided them with this. So this is using a different medium for my task, and that is printing it on blue paper. So by printing on blue paper, the words become less jumbled, and it becomes a much more of a clearer way for the students to actually being able to read. So there's less confusion and risk with that, this medium than you would get with probably a standard printout, which is on white paper. So far, I haven't encountered much issue. The students seem to be following along quite easily and have been answering questions well. So yeah, that has been quite successful. The other thing I make use of is the student mentors. So those particular students who have dyslexia, and all students in the classroom, but with a particular focus on them, have a mentor. The mentor in my class is called Alicia, and during these particular lessons, she will receive a copy of the worksheets and activities and the overall lesson plan prior to the actual lesson beginning, or shortly just after it commenced, so that she can actually follow through and read through and ensure that when her students that she is looking after and mentoring request assistance and I'm unable to give it, she is able to step in and assist them as they go through it. So Alicia has been working through the research task with the students, and she has received her own copy, so she can refer back to that in case of a question that I am unavailable. But those are the three main things that I've done in terms of adjustments for diverse learners. In terms of other suggestions for catering to diverse learners, one thing I would like to note is that making myself as approachable as possible, particularly those students who could potentially have a bit of a language background, attempting to scaffold the assessment task in that event. For this particular class, we haven't approached any of those language barriers, but that's something that certainly should be kept in mind for the future. So I think making sure that I'm someone that they can actually come to and ask questions is really important. I have stated in the previous entry that I do have a student mentor who assists me during these classes, a teacher's aide. And her particular focus is on those students who have additional diagnosed needs. Whereas for myself, I think it's very important that I make myself definitely approachable to all students, and that they can come to me to ask questions, potentially to negotiate, to work out deadlines, extensions if they require it. One thing that is to come into play is the use of group activity. I think peer learning is learning from your peers is a really ideal method for students who have diverse needs. They can learn off peers, and they can work together to develop also social skills and actually have their own friends and peers assist them in working through projects and assessments such as this. So going forward, I think that would be my those are my primary reflections on how I could make an assessment such as this more accessible to those who would require it.